Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Believe it or not, I think that this is episode 18. That blows me away of our whiskey interviews. Becky, just so that you know, we got these started right when Whiskey Week was canceled here in Chicago, right due to COVID. And as a direct result of that, a few of my friends and I, specifically Eric and I, decided to get together and do interviews, conduct interviews with industry pros for our friends. And these are friends with whom we have gone to many whiskey events over the years. We've been going to tastings. I've been going to tastings over 20 years now. And many of us have been going to tastings together for actually about 18 years, which is great. You know, it's wonderful. We've been drinking together. And I just want to welcome you. So we have with us tonight Becky Harris from Catoctin Creek. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Becky?
That's right.
Wonderful. Okay. Let's see. So what I want you to tell me right now, Becky, is what are you drinking tonight and why?
Okay, well, I started off with the blackberry bubbly, and that's because I was doing so many proofing work at the distillery over the past couple hours that I actually feel a little dehydrated. So I thought I better start with the no alcohol level, and then once I get a full can in me, I will switch over to a whiskey.
Well, please don't feel like there's any peer pressure here. We don't, you know, we're all for responsible drinking, although some of us have been irresponsible in the past, but we're all for responsible drinking. Let me tell you what I'm drinking, and actually you'll tell me about it more. So I have with me in a Whiskey Live Glencairn glass, I have the Catoctin Creek Roundstone Rye 92 proof. Okay, I believe you said that this is yes, it's the Distiller's Edition. I just picked it up at Binny's. Can you please tell me about it?
That one is probably it was probably our second real version of the whiskey. It's the tasting room staff's favorite whiskey. That's the entire staff. This one is their go-to. So whenever people come and they ask staff what they should get, they're always like, 92 is the one. That's the one you got to get. For me, they're more like my kids. I have different moods for different whiskeys, so they all kind of have their own place in the whiskey sphere, if you will. The 92 is what I like about the 92 that we have when you're tasting and drinking that is that what it really gets at 92 proof, we tend to find in some of the barrels. So these are all single barrels expressions. And so I'll actually taste through a fair number of barrels, probably that 8 to 10, 8 to 12, somewhere in that range at a time. And I will taste them at different proofs and then figure out what proof these barrels would display their characteristics best at. So for instance, if there are ones that just are like right away, oh, this is perfect, we don't want to do anything, those are the ones that we have a cask. Then we bring the samples down to 92 proof, try them around 92 proof. And right there, what I'm looking for is generally, some of my favorite ones have like a little note of like some plum or some citrus on the mid palate, almost like that kind of cola note. And if I hit that with a nice rounded spice and a really gorgeous nose, that's the ones I'm going to leave at 92. And then of course the 80 proof ones, I'm just looking for easy sipping. And so that one is probably it's definitely our bestseller. The 92 I think is one that more of your whiskey drinkers like. And so that's the one I would expect more of a whiskey enthusiast group generally is the one they'd like, that one more.
You know, it's funny you mention cola, because I was actually thinking of like birch beer. You know, like something like that, like sort of like one of the sweeter sodas, but still that has some body to it, with some chocolate notes. It's delicious. So what about the mash bill? So, you know, tell us about the actual grain mix that goes into making this.
So what we do is all our whiskeys are 100% rye. What we do for to kind of add a little depth of flavor is that we get our rye from three to four different places. It varies. Generally, it's we do about half of it is from a farm down in the Tidewater, down. It's kind of near the Rappahannock River. Then we have maybe a third of it that comes from a little bit north of us up toward Pennsylvania. And then we've got like on and off, I get a little bit that's within 15 minutes of the distillery. He's a tiny little farm, and so I'm pulling different places together to put in the flavor. And so when I bring in a new farmer, what I do is I'll actually make 100% rye from their mash bill. And then I get a feeling for, okay, what does this taste like? Some of the rye will taste, it's almost airy. It's just very finely flavored. And some of it has a lot more spice. And, we've worked with places which we don't work with anymore that almost were dusty or didn't have some real things I like. So I'm really looking for, okay, where does this fit into what I want to do? So I don't try to work with farmers and tell them what to grow. What I like to do is do it as a collaboration. So I'm not saying I want you to grow this varietal of rye because that's what I want to put on my label. I want to say with them, what works best for you and your land in our partnership so that you're making good money and we make good whiskey.
Sure.
And so when like Timmy, who is our main supplier right now, he'll come to me and say, I was thinking of trying this rye next year. What do you think? And I'm like, we talk about it and I'm like, let's do this, grow a small plot. We'll do a test and then we'll see where it fits. And based on that, then we can, plan for the next year. So he tends to do that. And it's worked really well as far as that goes. So it's like, he knows what grows well on his land. He's had a good experience with it and he's an experienced farmer. So he really knows what he's doing. It's generally when you've got people that don't really know farming, but have a lot of money. Those are the people that generally you have a little more trouble with their product just because they're not necessarily 100% on what the game is specifically.
And I noticed also that you mentioned in your website that you try to be completely chemical free. So you're looking for more or organic methods of growing the rye, and
Right.
that's that method. Okay. So
Yeah.
one thing you mentioned right now that just sounds fascinating to me. So I love the idea that when you have a new supplier for your grain, that you make a 100% spirit 100% from them. Are those ever so good that you're like so glad that you made it, that you actually keep that barrel, that you maybe want to bottle it or something? Do you do anything with it?
We sometimes have those and we will release them as like private barrel expressions. So like if they come out and I'm tasting through them and I'm like, oh wow, this is really cool, then we'll go ahead and offer that out. Sometimes we've done some every now and then, we will do special releases in the distillery as like a gift store kind of thing. Hopefully as we can become, get a better ability to be able to direct ship to people nationwide. I think that, those kind of things will become more common. I think it's been interesting, just in the political sense of COVID and what's been happening is really kind of the landscape of the legal ability of what distilleries can and should be able to do to connect with customers is changing a lot. And I think that if we can get more ability as small producers to interact directly with consumers, a lot like wineries already have been doing for 20 some years, if we could get that kind of ability, I think that whiskey lovers would really enjoy it because they would get a lot of access to stuff that not everybody gets access to. Now, granted, y'all are near Binny's for the most part, and they do a pretty good job of trying to get their hands on everything.
Yeah, we're fortunate here, and there are some people here on the call who aren't from Chicago, but yeah, most of us are, and you're right. We really are blessed here, not only with amazing liquor stores, Binny's, Warehouse, but we also have great whiskey bars, good restaurants. We have great selections out here, so we are fortunate. I do have a few other questions specifically about the spirit, and being that you are, you're a chemist, you're you're the, the master distiller. Talk to me a little bit about. I know that all of your water is just locally sourced right there. It's very clean water. What about the barrels? What are you aging your spirits in?
So we've got a couple different. Most of it is 30-gallon Minnesota char #3. I like those. Initially, we did them out of practicality. When we started the company 11 years ago, I was the only person there working while my husband kept his day job. And I can pretty much do almost anything I need to with a 30-gallon barrel, whether it's full or empty.
Right. It's not that big. It's not that big. You can
53
handle it.
is a little bigger.
Yeah.
And when you're working alone by yourself with a 53, you want to be a lot more cautious. So we started initially with 30s. It was the largest barrel I could handle by myself. And it also gives you a little oomph with wood contact, as initially our whiskey was just months old. And we were really kind of trying to figure out where we were going to get there with. What I like at the 30s is that the way that our flavor is developed, with rye, one of the nice things about rye and its characteristics is that rye is a really delicious, youthful spirit in a way that bourbon always necessarily isn't 100%. And that just generally across the board. I mean, generally, I have been a bourbon skeptic in a lot of ways. I tend to have much more of a palate that lends toward barley or rye.
Are you saying that you like younger spirits more than older
no,
spirits?
what I'm saying is that personally, my flavor palette is less attuned to corn.
Oh, okay.
That
All right.
corn for me is a little bit, it has to be generally a little high rye. I don't, I'm kind of fussy about corn-based spirits. So, but I do find that rye tastes really delicious, relatively young. And I've tasted a bunch of ryes that are relatively young, and they all tend to be really, really quite good in a way that I find that if I try even a 1-year-old to 2-year-old, bourbon, a lot of times it's not my jam.
Interesting. I remember a few years ago I had a bottle of rye that actually said on it was 2 years old rye, and a lot of people were like, "That's so young," and it was from Low Gap, Low Gap in California.
I love their stuff. They do some really cool things.
Right, and it was a 2-year rye, and it was absolutely delicious. And
yeah, rye doesn't have a lot of that kind of harsh notes that come in that I think can kind of make spirits taste really young. Even though it's all about kind of conversion and the flavor. Our spirit is pretty. The biggest thing I think is keeping that rye really clean. Clean it multiple times throughout the process before you're milling it. Keep it in really good condition. Good clean fermentation, and distillation wise, I tend to like my rye just under 2 years old. That's kind of a really good place in the 30-gallon barrel. Now we've got some 4-year-olds that we do our Rebel Rouser. That one I'm still clearing out the 4-year-old that are in the 30-gallon barrels, but I'm losing probably a third of it.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So are you at all planning to try to make older spirits because of how it might play in the marketplace? Are you experimenting?
The Rebel is going in 53s because I can't afford to do older spirits in 30-gallon barrels. I just can't afford it. If I'm going to get to 4 years old and lose a third of everything, and that's not
it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And
but we didn't have a suitable warehouse until probably, what is it, like 2 years ago now, for storing 53-gallon barrels. We were storing them in a horse barn out in the county, about 15 minutes from where the distillery was. So I would load 4 30-gallon barrels in the back of my 93 Ford Ranger and drive them over. And we had an ATV ramp that we roll them down, and then you could flip them end over end into the barn and into the horse stalls where you kind of set them up. And that was where a lot of our whiskey was aged for a number of years. And so
Now, and in Virginia, it gets pretty warm there,
yes,
so
it
you
does.
might have,
Absolutely.
so what's your angel share per year? How does that affect you, the
It's pretty
evaporation?
typical. It's not really crazy. I mean, I think in the horse barn, it was a little worse, maybe just because it was poorly maintained. So sometimes there would be precipitation on it or things like that, and that probably just added some more stress to the barrels. But generally, we generally have a pretty typical angel share, 10 to 15% over time. It's only when you get to 4 years that you really start really losing a lot more. So we're hoping that when we start releasing from the 53s, my plan kind of long-term with the Rabble project, and I distill that a little different than I distill the Roundstone. So the Roundstone I'm distilling, it's just under 160, which isn't much different really than the Rabble. But what I'm doing is I'm adding a little more reflux to the distillation process.
Okay.
So that kind of makes that distillation, that flavor curve a little tighter, and it gives me that little bit of cleaner hearts. And so that makes it really, a little less of that chewiness, that texture and stuff that you want to have a little more time for everything to work on. So for the Rabble, which is the Bottled and Bond project, which is always going to be 4 years and 100 proof.
And 100 proof, right?
That's coming out now, and I'm harvesting those barrels as they hit to 4 years. But over the period of time, I've got now some barrels that have been in 53s for 2 years. And so I'm looking at those. I'm probably going to release those when they're 5 to 6 years old and start working the age up in that way as I'm able to kind of juggle my production. We're getting ready to buy a bigger still, do some expansion. Right now, we're pretty much at capacity as far as what is reasonable for our space and our equipment. So we're going to get a bigger still, do some stuff. So that might make me do some changes, but really that's going to be a little bit kind of down the road as far as building that older product.
Now, with respect to back to the casks, again, a lot of your counterparts at different distilleries have been doing things with, sherry casks, obviously, different types of wine casks, even vermouth casks. Have you been experimenting with that, and is that something that you're planning to do, or are you sticking with the straightforward charred oak?
So what we do is we do our main product line is the straight up regular. What we do is we reserve all the experiment barrels as barrel picks. So one of the things, let me see. So like for instance, this is our barrel select whiskeys.
Okay.
And so what we do is we have these as barrel picks. Usually they're store picks, restaurant picks, things like that. This one just happened to be a limited release we did. These were, this particular one was whiskeys aged in peach brandy barrels.
Peach brandy.
We make peach brandy. And so I had 3 barrels, and we'd been shopping them around a while as barrel picks, and nobody was, really going to it. And what was interesting about it was that when you took those and you tasted them at cask, you were like, I kind of get some peach. And then you brought it down to 92 and you were like, well, maybe there's a little peach there. But you know what? If you took that sucker to 80, the peach went,
wow.
And it really came out lovely. So
as a chemist, you must love that type of experimentation.
Well, that's really where where you talk about flavor and proof, that different things are perceptible at different proofs. And that's why, it's some of what, that's why the way we run our project is we do it with single barrels, but we're doing it to figure out what they are. So people are always asking me, how do I ensure that it's exactly the same? And I'm like, it's more about the flavor, and I'm choosing barrels to fit a general idea of a flavor profile as opposed to trying to blend to make a perfectly consistent product day by day.
Right. I mean, because your way, the way you're doing it, it shouldn't be exactly the same each time.
No, it's definitely close, and it's a family of things. But what I'm looking for more is like, it's kind of esoteric in the way that people can be, but it's like a feeling or a family of flavors. So my cask proof, they're not all going to be identical. Some of them might have some really great chocolate notes. Some of them might have this really honey texture and some of this other stuff, but it's like they all give me the same kind of experience that I'm looking for in having it. And that's really what I'm kind of tasting, and the people that I taste with, we're all kind of looking for this. We all have this kind of vision. I have a couple of the young women that work in the tasting room. We don't always have the same notes on a spirit, but we all kind of agree what it should be. So it's like, she'll be like, when Maria comes in and she'll be like, this one, it's not spicy enough. It needs to be not, the 92 needs to be spicier. And, and I didn't describe it as that. I wouldn't think it was that, but it's like, the way we're describing it is different.
But we're each going to be
both
tasting
know
different
that what it
things.
should be. And that's what's kind of fun about it.
Right. I mean, we're all going to get different things off of a dram. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's just what we each taste.
Yeah, exactly.
And with respect to that, as far as how decisions are made, so you're the master distiller, you're the chemist, your husband is more of the sales and marketing. What role does he play with respect to the bringing things to market? So for instance, is he involved in the tasting process, or is he more of the business guy?
No, the challenge with with more products is that it's you can kind of, because of the way that the system runs where you're working through distributors, you have to have a certain amount of discipline in how many SKUs you can introduce and how many SKUs you can support and taste through, and yet you want innovation, but innovation comes at a cost at that same time. So as Scott is always there at the side saying, wait a minute, not too fast, not too many, you have to be able to have these things. So, the doing this kind of barrel select project really allows us to kind of do a lot of the kind of wilder stuff that we want to do.
But does that get out to the wide market, or does that pretty much have to stay near you?
We have, we've had we had like one of our barrels, a lot of times store picks, they can be anywhere. So I've had, San Francisco stores pick up a barrel of something.
Right, Binny's, and there have been Binny's picks. I know there have been Binny's picks.
Sure, yeah, and all those things, when somebody finds something that resonates, with that store, then that's the opportunity we have to kind of put together something that people can get behind. Fred's had a couple picks. Fred Minnick has had a couple picks that he's done down when he had the Bourbon and Beyond. So I try to keep a variety of different kinds of things going. A lot of it is more collaborative. I try not to do a lot of getting barrels, just going out and saying, I need 60 cognac barrels so that I can do a cognac finish release.
Right.
More typical is I've been working with, this brewery, and, Port City is a fairly good sized local mid-Atlantic brewery. They had some barrels we worked out, and then they are having their 10th anniversary. It's coming up. They wanted to do something. So we even distilled a beer to be a malt whiskey for their collaboration.
Perfect.
So
that's great. That's nice.
We kind of do some things. We do a fair number of malts as well. And most of them are collaborative. Like this is was our Octomalt that we did with one of the local.
That's a great label. I love that label.
Isn't this label Boss?
Wow. Nice. So what does that taste like?
This one was really yummy. It was, this was like an Octo IPA that we distilled. So it had it's got like a lot of floral characteristics that come out from all those hops. And so it's a lot of fun. These malts are kind of like our little side project that we do. So we'll release a few of them a year, probably only doing maybe 2 or 3 30-gallon barrels. So you're talking.
That's a small release. Yeah,
it's a small release. So it's, we might get I think for the Colossal 10 from Port City that we're releasing in October, I think I have 107, 600 bottles.
Oh
So,
yeah, that's not much at all. And
no, so those
are
are
you
all
doing
really small.
right? Do you ever in one of the comments, somebody, I think it was Paul, who mentioned that I saw the word octomalt there, and a lot of us who drink a lot of scotch, we immediately think of octomore,
Yeah,
which is
not.
like drinking a delicious ashtray. But speaking of that, do you ever get involved in smoking any of your malt and anything along those lines?
We haven't really. The coolest thing that I think brought some smoky notes in our whiskey that was kind of and we do it semi-regularly, is we actually have a local hickory syrup producer.
Oh,
And so, if you're not familiar with the process of making hickory syrup, what they're doing is they go out and they pick bark off the shag bark hickory trees.
okay.
Well, their bark falls off, so they go out and they'll collect that bark, they clean it, and they toast it, and then they have a process by which they infuse that bark into sucrose syrup.
Okay.
And it comes out, it looks kind of like a maple syrup, and it's but it's got like this little smoky note,
Like a barbecue thing, because I do a lot of I have a few, Eric and I have actually competed in barbecue competitions, and so is this something where the maple syrup almost gets like a barbecue type smell to it?
To me, it's like a little bit of, yeah, that smoky flavor. It
Huh.
was really like, one time, the first time I tried it, I kept trying to figure out what it was that cask proof was reminding me of. And somebody said bacon, and I smelled it, and it was like, yes, it's bacon. It's got that sweet smell, and then it had that little bit of smokiness that was like bacon. So that's really kind of, we use those hickory. I'm trying to see if I have any of it. I do have a little of it here. So those ones, our
That's
syrup
dark.
finished.
That's a dark color. Wow.
Yeah, it's what I do with those is I generally only release these at cask proof, because I find that if I take the proof down too far, it becomes dominated by the sweet.
Yeah, you
And
don't want that, right?
and when I'm tasting it, I want that sweet and then alcohol to kind of come at me at the same time. I don't necessarily want to be sitting there tasting just sweet.
Got it. Understood. So I'm going to ask you one more question before I open it up to everybody else, because I don't want to dominate it. I have a bunch of other questions, but I'm not going to go there right now unless I need to later. Just very briefly, how has the distillery been holding up during COVID? How you guys been doing?
I'm beat. No, it's been we've been hanging in there. We're lucky. We're really lucky. We had a really good, solid, strong local following.
Good.
And we had a state that made it very easy for us to ship to our solid, strong local following directly during
Nice.
the pandemic, because they were first allowing curbside pickup, but we're too far out. And
Right.
but once we were able to start direct shipping, and what that does is it changes your business model a little bit, because now you have fans all over the place, and
Right.
they might come over and they might not be able to drive up from Norfolk to come and buy a bottle of my Life's a Peach.
Right.
But when they know it's coming out, they might go ahead and have it shipped to them. And so it's really kind of helped the small experimental release market, and it's kind of made it so that we're able to kind of lean into that, because in some of our further flung markets, especially when COVID first hit and we weren't able to do tastings and we weren't able to visit, bars and restaurants,
Right.
they're not picking up spirits,
No,
right
no.
now they're just trying to hold on. So the challenge is, how do you grow your brand when your on-premise business, which is the best way to introduce new markets to your products, is down 70%? And
Right.
that's your best case.
Right. And all of the whiskey tastings. I mean, as I mentioned,
All the
everybody
whiskey
here,
tastings.
we've been going to
Oh,
tastings together for years, and
exactly. It's
that's where
just
I met your
been,
husband Scott last year. I mentioned that he and I met at Whiskey Live last year when I was staff there, it was events like that are a unique opportunity to really touch your
so
customers,
much. So
and
much because you get a chance to really kind of connect with people. They can
right,
experience a lot of stuff. They can get a feel for what you're doing, hear a story straight from the horse's mouth. Digital is great, but it's not the same. Everybody gets Zoom fatigue at some point.
right,
And
and that's
you know,
it's funny you mentioned that because we do these things and we're only doing them every 2 weeks or so. We could absolutely do them more frequently, but we decided not to because we don't want to have Zoom fatigue.
yes.
But now because of the recent upswing in cases and the lockdowns, we're starting to schedule through March. It's I never in my wildest nightmares would have expected that this would still be going on, and even after the lockdowns finally end, we're going to continue this, but maybe not as frequently, maybe
Yeah.
once a month, something like that. We're going to keep
Yeah.
going because we're all going to be out doing stuff. But I want to shut up right now and open it up for questions. But first, Eric, do you have any specific questions before we open it up to anybody else?
Sure. I guess now that things are starting to, I was going to say wind down because probably the Christmas time is going to get busy, but what are you excited about in the next year?
Let's see. Well, first of all, before COVID, I was supposed to be on the road all year. And it went from being like I wasn't Allison Park on the road, but I was getting pretty close. I kid her because I love her, but
She's got a lot of energy.
Oh yeah.
but I was getting pretty close to it. And the challenge was then, of course, then first we did hand sanitizer, taking on the ACSA presidency, the American Craft Spirits Association presidency this year. It was, I was excited to get involved, but I sure didn't anticipate getting involved in this, the number of things that has been thrown at that our organization this year has just been crazy.
Right, Margie Lerman. We interviewed Margie, a few weeks back, and it was fascinating when she told us that almost overnight, all of you had to become experts in how to produce hand sanitizer.
Oh my God! I mean,
That's amazing.
Well, and the distribution of that versus regular alcohol.
it was just, I was so glad to be done because it's like, yes, we needed it. We did our bit, but God, the bitterant is terrible. It's like, I don't even want it in my place. And, it was like, then when I started seeing it at 7-Elevens, it's like, okay, peace out. We're done, get it gone. It's done. I think that the challenge is, as a lot of the emergency guidance goes away, then what are these small distilleries who still are making it, or they still, transitioning them to, full FDA approval, that kind of stuff. We're kind of trying to put together some educational stuff on that, but it's been kind of hard because, like, frankly, I'm out. I'm not doing it. So it's like trying to reach out to some of the people who are still doing it and having them kind of share their knowledge with some of the other people. But I guess some of the small ones are doing like federal contracts, right? Because you get small business set-asides for federal contracts. And so they've been able to find some space for that. And if that helps them get through this next year or so, God bless. I mean, it's going to be a real challenge. A lot of these small distilleries, I talked to a number of them, their peak season, a lot of them were they were on the beaches, they make rum. Nobody came, people weren't out.
Oh.
Their year was done. They don't do big Christmas stuff. They do their stuff in the summer. And so, all the challenges that, people think of distilleries and they think of people like Catoctin, or they think of people like Few as being small distilleries. We're not small distilleries. We're good sized small distilleries. We're still small,
right?
But the places that are out there, and the vast majority of the small distilleries in this country probably make less than 1,000 cases a year.
Wow. Wow.
Most of it, 40% of it goes out their front door, and another 40% goes out in their home state, and that's it. Anything else is just tiny.
That's
And
fascinating.
so
You know, and because
that's
right,
small.
because you guys, you know, we can get your stuff all over the, you know, not all over the country, but you're in most states.
Yeah.
You know, we can get your stuff, and there are these small local distilleries all around the country that pretty much just distribute locally.
Yes.
You know, that's fascinating.
And that's when you start getting involved in this organization, that's what really wakes you up to kind of the, you know, you're just how challenging it can be for those people, you
Right.
know, because those people are really depending on butts and seats to
Right.
get those sales because they just don't have that same kind of built up. If I hadn't been in this for 10 years, you know, we'd have been in the same position. We'd have been 1,000 cases a year, you know, but it's definitely a different kind of dynamic for those guys. So, you know, I just am trying to do what I can do to keep them, you know, keep them alive, keep them going. You know, I'm fortunate enough, we're going to be okay. But some of them aren't. And that's really what's going to be.
Yeah, that's the shame. Yeah, that's the shame.
Because
So
a lot of them
let's open
operate
it
like
up.
bars or restaurants.
Yeah,
And they're not going to be
that's-
okay either.
No, they're not. And though, let's not start crying now.
I
because,
know.
you know,
More drinks.
yeah, drink more. So let's open it up to questions.
I know
Happy
Michael.
questions.
I know Michael Bloom had a couple questions.
I can see Michael Nolan out raising a hand. Who do we want to go to first, Bloom or Nolan? You decide, Eric.
Let's go Bloom, then Nolan, and then we'll end up go with the double question, Paul.
Okay. And I get to be double question, Michael. One is a consumer question. That's the one I'll ask first. So how does the cask strength rye that we see on the shelves here compare to the 92 and the 80? I'm interested in that.
Okay, so the experience, the experience of the rye, and I kind of like to describe it in that is, to me, when I want a cask proof, when I'm going through and tasting for the cask proof, what makes a cask proof for me? So basically dump my spirit into a 30-gallon polypropylene drum with a removable lid. Okay, it sits in there, and then we'll go through, and I like to do it just by pop that lid off and stick my head in. And what's the first thing I think? Because to me, if it doesn't smell good, it's going to be hard to get me excited about it. I mean, especially even if I'm at a whiskey show and I'm going around, and if I'm sniffing something and it isn't enticing, I might not even taste it, because especially, you know, you get palate fatigue. And so, you know, you definitely want that first. It should smell good. And so the first thing that we do is pop that open and I'll take a whiff. And if there are ones that kind of like are my leaders, then I'm kind of like focused in on them. Okay, the nose is great. Now what? So then you just take a sip. And so for me, the experience of a really good cask proof to me is, first of all, yes, it's strong. It's 58% ABV. So I don't want to be thinking that I'm not drinking 58% ABV. You definitely taste that alcohol, and that warmth and that burn is there. But I also don't want to have to, I've had, and it was a beautiful whiskey in the end, but it was a whiskey where I took a sip and took my first sip and it just burned. And I mean, I just sat there and waited because I couldn't taste anything because it was all burn. And then about 10, 20 seconds in, when the burn finally dissipated, it's like, oh, okay, now I can taste what the whiskey tastes like. I don't want that. When I want it, if there's alcohol and there's power of the alcohol, I want the power of the flavor and the viscosity of the flavor to be right there to it. So it should coat your tongue. You should definitely know it's high proof, but you should also not be waiting for the flavor. So it's just right at you together. Great nose, really good flavor coming right at you. And then it should have a nice long finish.
Excellent. Thanks. That was a great question. You know what, Erica, I'll pass because I know everybody else has questions. So
Okay. Michael Nolan?
Yeah, hopefully you didn't answer this because I was a few minutes late. I had some technical issues along with I've been baking, so that's why I bolted away for a little bit. Actually, I have 3 questions, and I'll throw them all out there. The first one, you mentioned you're getting new stills. How do you think this is going to affect your spirit down the road? I mean, do you think it's going to change or influence it in a new direction? Second, something that really interests me, you were talking about early on in this interview about meeting new farmers, bringing new grain in. Do you find a real difference in terroir between all these different farmers? That really kind of interests me. I think it's very fascinating. And third, I know you're friends with a friend of mine, Jason Johnson Yellen. I know that UNSCN is working on a project that should be coming out shortly. I mean, it's almost been a year in the barrel, as if memory serves me. So how is that looking?
No, I sent Jason a bottle and he hadn't said anything, so I don't know.
He's
You
been,
know,
they've
I
been
imagine
really
it'll be
super
coming.
busy.
They're being patient. Let's
Yeah.
just say that. They feel like enough happened between, I guess, was it June and August, that they want to keep seeing, so like, I think once a quarter I pull them a sample and send it to them. And then they're kind of, I don't know exactly what they're looking for, but they feel like it's still going somewhere. So they want to kind of keep on the ride.
Well, I know he's got them all set up side by side to also see what that progression looks like.
Yeah,
You
so
wanna
that's
tell
fun.
everyone else a little bit about that project?
We've got a couple different, I'm trying to remember.
This is the one that's in the Kilhoman sherry cask.
Yeah, so it's a Kilhoman sherry cask, and of course it's smoky as all hell. And we've got some rye in there, and I believe it was God, what was it now? Now I'm like, geez, if I'd have thought of that, I'd have looked it up.
Oh.
I think we put 1-year-old rye in there for a finish. And then did we put new make in there? We put new make in one for them. I keep getting confused.
This wasn't new make. This was
finished, wasn't it?
right, exactly.
Yeah, okay. So that's probably been a 1-year finish, but honestly, a finish, I find, there are some people who talk about a finish as, 6 weeks, 12 weeks or whatever. It's all you're doing with the finish is just dialing back some influences from some of the oak, and you're changing it, and different kinds of aging is happening, and different kinds of maturation and interactions. And so it's like you can take those rides and see where they go, and they might go somewhere really interesting. And it is very cyclical in what you might see. And I had a lovely discussion with Dan Farber, who is the chief distiller at Oso Callis in California. He's probably the oldest brandy producer in the country, one of the first ones. And we were out there in his cellar and tasting through things. And the way brandy people work, which is kind of like low gap, which we were talking about a little earlier, there's some different techniques they use. And a lot of those techniques are older barrels that are not bringing oak to the party. They're bringing all the other things that maturation does. And that's really what's fun about doing some of these finishes, and not looking at them as I'm trying to extract a flavor from this barrel, but rather I have this barrel, let's go on a trip with it and see where it goes, and kind of see what it does and what the interaction is with this spirit as we go into it. And so I think perhaps the extractive part of these kind of finishes is the least interesting part of these. At least that's how I roll with them.
Thank you.
And as far as
what
the
about its
terroir,
question about the
Michael,
stills?
Sorry, and the terroir. So that I feel like, and this also wraps into the still thing. So when I'm working with my farmers, the terroir is, they're changing up a grain or they want to try something different. I'm cool with that. I figure out how I wrap it into the mash bill. So each mash bill is consisted of 3 or 4 different farms, depending on where I'm getting it from. And I'm building a flavor profile with all those parts, but it's all 100% rye. Okay, so I never make a change in those mash bills, that's not gradual, because I see it as, oh, I started out, when I started with Timmy, he was at 15%. After 6 months, I moved him to 20%, then 30% for a while. And then I started ramping it up. Now it's 50%. Some of the other ones I dial around. I add somebody in, I'll move somebody back. Those things are part of it. And I see it as more of a growth management kind of thing from that perspective. I'm going to see the still thing. We're designing the still to be very similar. It's going to be bigger. Of course, that changes some things. You know, going from my 100-gallon still to my 300-gallon still definitely changed some things. But, you know, really as a distiller, that's my responsibility to figure out how I bridge that transition, and to do it sensitively, and to really look at where the flavor's going and what I might need to do to adjust it and kind of create that continuity. I don't have any anticipation of having it change overnight. I think that's going to be, you know, basically part of my job is when we get it in, how do we kind of bridge that? What do we do? Maybe we run both stills for a while and blend them together to give that continuity of flavor and wean one out. I haven't quite decided yet. I'm going to see what it looks like when I get it in.
Thank
I
you.
think that covered it all.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Nicely done. Paul, you there?
Yeah, not to be outdone by Michael Nolan, I have to come up with a 4-part question now.
I saw that.
So I guess I'll start with this one, right? Gin, brandy, rye. That's an interesting combination. So how did this come about for you? Which of those was kind of the passion, and how did you get into actually distilling itself?
Okay, so got into it. My husband, I'm kind of an enabler. So his best job ever, that he said he had been 20 years government contracting. He likes to say he was doing the 27th revision of a PowerPoint for a program that they were bidding on that he knew they weren't going to get, but he still had to revise it about 25 times. And nobody was reading these slides except one person who would make him change things around. And he was daydreaming about what his favorite job had been. And he had liked one in high school where he'd been working in a winery. We had probably 40 wineries around us, but in the meantime, he had gotten interested in spirits. And so he kind of got this daydream of maybe we could do a distillery, and kind of went back and forth. And then he came to me and asked me about it. And it was I'm a chemical engineer. So I'd done copper and nickel plating on plastics. I've done polystyrene foam extrusion, and I've done like contact lens manufacturing, which is polymer reactions. So when he came to me with that, it was more like, okay, I can learn whatever I need to learn to make whiskey. Can you make money making whiskey? And so my challenge to him, because I was like, at that point, I was getting ready to start getting back to work. My 2 kids had gotten to where they were just about out of elementary school. And I said, you know, I'm going to be supportive. Why don't you write a business plan? And so he did. He went off and he worked on it. He almost gave it up because it didn't make a lot of sense. And then he finally came to a model whereby we basically took everything we'd saved when we were both working, put it into a still, and I was as cheap labor as I was ever going to be because I hadn't gone back to work yet. And at that point I was like, well, I can work here. It's a 2-minute commute to home. And I would go in early in the morning, and then I'd be done with the run in time to get the kids off the bus. And it was a way to kind of try it out. And he kept the day job. And so that's kind of how we started it. We really chose rye. At one point it was, we decided we wanted to do rye because of the history of rye in this part of the country. You know, that's what people did in Virginia. George Washington was the biggest rye distillery in in the colonies at that point, or the young country at that point. And, we felt like that was something that wasn't getting a lot of attention at that time. And we thought it was an interesting story, and it was a neat story to be telling. So that was kind of where we went with the rye. The gin, we had thought we were going to do an unaged spirit and a gin to kind of tide us over until our whiskey had gotten to a certain age. But we were kind of foiled in that by the ABC. So when we took our products to the Virginia ABC, they tasted through and went, yeah, we're going to pass on those 2 white ones for right now. You can bring them back next year, but we want the whiskey. And so we were like, great. All right, we're going to figure out how to do this damn thing. And we figured out, basically, I figured out how can I make a whiskey taste good after only a number of months. And I did. It was good. It was young, but it was good. And then I basically kept ahead of it and got growing it to where it is now, where I like it a little more. And it tastes better to me even at this point. But so it was essentially kind of part of that. Gin was part of our initial white spirit toolkit. Gin was not my passion. I had the bad gin experience. We all have like the bad tequila experience, bad gin experience. Everybody's got a bad something experience. And it was like, okay, I've got to create a gin. And it had been 20 years since I'd had any gin. So it was like I kind of came up with a profile that I liked, and I obviously, after 20 years, it doesn't bother me anymore. I can even drink Tanqueray. But that was kind of where the gin came from. And it was fun. It was fun to play with. It's fun to kind of play with those interactions. Gin's a tough category. A lot of it is, our gin is very, very good. It's excellent. But the category is really, it tends to be a hard category to kind of move.
Well, it's tough. It's tough to make money in gin too, because the margins are so low.
And so we have our gin out, and I love it, and it sells well, but it's never going to, whiskey pays the bills. And so that's really kind of where it is. Brandy that's for fun. We're in a part of our state which is full of wineries and fruit, grapes, pears, peaches, all around us. And so what we do is we make this brandy as a collaborative effort. So what we generally do is we partner with the winery, and if it's a big harvest, then we can work it out so that they charge us something where they make a little money. And then at the end of this, we'll make a little money on the brandy too. And it gets fruit. One of my best friends in the Virginia wine industry, a man named Doug Fabioli, a godfather to a lot of wineries around here, says, he's made a career. He doesn't let fruit hit the ground. And so he wants to turn everything into something for somebody. And if you can't make, it into enough wine that you want to sell in the bottle, he's going to look for a way to make it into something else and partner with somebody who can do it. And so, we have one winery that we make the peach wine with. They make the peach wine for us. We distill it, and, they make a little, we make a little. It moves very slowly. Americans don't get brandy. They kind of understand cognac, but American brandy is not something they really tend to get right now, let alone peach brandy, pear brandy, even apple brandy we sell them mostly out of our gift store. They move some regionally, and they mostly sell out of our gift store. So I can make, and it stays alive, and our brandies are quite lovely, and I enjoy the heck out of them. And, I laughed because my friend Joe Herron, of course, who started Copper and Kings in Louisville, he was like, I'm going to make American brandy the next hot thing. And I'm like, go Joe, come on. I'm like rooting for him.
Let's cross our fingers, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a fun category, and it's really great to taste. And, and I think that the people who love it. And so we can make money on it. We don't make a killing on it, but that's it's something we do to keep that tradition alive. I think it's something we can do to keep that tradition alive.
Well, and where I was going with that is in the stills, right? You're using the same stills. I had thought that a lot of brandy stills were a little bit more, different from like the whiskey stills, especially the copper pot stills, if you're doing whiskey that way.
It depends on where you're making it. You know, in Germany, a lot of the Germans make it, they make their brandy in the same stills you buy in this country for making whiskey. You know, there's Charente stills, and there's some other, you know, kind of stills that you get in France specifically, where they're a little more particular about things. But, you know, it's a different category. So it's American brandy, not cognac.
Yep, very nice. Paul, any other specific questions? No. Debbie, I know that you just finished off a bottle. You posted before, Debbie. What bottle did you are you polishing off tonight? Yeah, unmute yourself.
Oh, I recognize that stopper.
Yep.
There we go. So what do you got there?
Oh, she's got the 2.
Oh,
Yeah, so we're
Oh, and
talking
he's got
about
the 3.
This is the 2. This was my introduction to you.
Oh,
Thank
damn.
you, Jason, for sharing this with me. I'm just about to polish it off, but this is a fabulous bottle. And you talked about 2, and it was like, don't be scared of 2. And this is probably one of the best bottles I've ever had. I've been rationing it for a long time, since it was distilled in 2011 and bottled in 2014, and I've been rationing it.
That was a crazy bottle. I still don't, you know, it was like, yeah, it was nuts. It was like a bunch of stuff that I had sitting around, and I had this Chardonnay barrel that Scott had ordered by accident. And so I put a bunch of stuff in there just to clear up tank space. And then that was, you know, and then Jason comes around asking for, do you have any strange stuff?
Yeah,
It sounds like
That
Jason.
was like, let's
Yeah.
pull some of that. And I'm going, oh, I don't know.
yeah.
Because I don't even know what, you know, that I haven't tasted it. It's just been sitting there. And it was crazy. It really was. I mean, the two and the 3 were really an interesting pairing, because they were kind of like similar, but they're quite different in the way that the flavors turned out. And it was really that was really a fun one. I really couldn't believe how that one came out. Who
Oh, that's
knows?
great.
You know, there's
Right.
some of it that you can't even put your finger on. I don't even think I could reproduce it if I wanted to.
But that's part of the magic, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it really is an art and a science. And I think on that note, I mean, we could go on for a long time, but we actually are at 1 hour now. So out of respect for your time, I'm going to ask everybody to, if you're inclined to do so, everybody, please pour yourself a little dram, and everybody, please unmute yourselves, and please, at your leisure, join me and raise a glass to our guest, Becky Harris, and say thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Hey, Becky.
you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers,
you,
Becky.
guys.
This has been wonderful. Really love your stuff. It was great meeting Scott last year at Whiskey Live. The bottle that I have right now is absolutely wonderful. I've been drinking a little bit too much of it tonight. And really, I just want to say thank you very much. And these were some great questions. And as I mentioned beforehand, what we're going to do right now is we're going to turn off the recording. And if you are so inclined to hang around with us a little bit for an after party, please do so, but you're under no
Yeah.
obligation. Thank you very much, everybody.
Hey, thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you all.